Hello, I'm Aaron Matus with D1 Ticker here for another D1 Extra. And today we are joined by the Pac-12 Hotline's Jon Wilner to talk a little bit of college football playoff and what's going on now that the rankings are out. And Jon, I got to be perfectly honest with you. I think me and many had our hot takes ready for how to justify putting Ohio State in the playoff. One loss Ohio State over one loss Oregon. When Oregon beat Ohio State, we were all ready for it, and then it didn't happen. Oregon currently in the top four. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I wouldn't throw those hot takes out yet because they could come in handy in about 5 weeks. I kind of put a little bit of faith in the committee that it was going to follow its stated protocol, which is if two teams are fairly close on the analytics and the pedigree, that you give the edge to the head-to-head. And they did that, not just for Oregon, Ohio State, but there were a couple instances where we saw head-to-head take preference, like Wisconsin, Iowa, right? I mean, if you're going to put Iowa in, you kind of got to put Wisconsin in, even though they got 3 losses.
So now the question is, I guess on a small scale, is how does Oregon stay in the top 4? Of course, that's going to involve winning out. We know that. And it also leads to the bigger picture of what does the Pac-12 need to be doing to stay in this conversation. But I guess, for this year, the next coming weeks, what's their path look like to stay?
Well, they do have to win out, and they got to look good doing it, because most likely they're not going to play any ranked teams the rest of the way, right? The Pac-12, and we can get into this a little bit more, but Pac-12 got hit hard with a lot of losses early in the season. And though that's coming home to roost now because there's no ranked teams, right? There's no ranked teams in the AP poll. There's no ranked teams in the CFP poll. So Oregon does not have nearly as much juice in its schedule down the stretch as Ohio State does or as Oklahoma does. So they have got to look good. I mean, they cannot be letting unranked sub 500 teams hang around until there are 5 minutes left in the game. The committee's going to be paying close attention. And then they're going to need help. They're going to need help with losses in other conferences. There's no doubt about that.
So we kind of wanted to ask you, we'll just want to jump ahead to this doomsday scenario because it sounds like it's going to be tough to stay in the top 4. So I want to ask, what's better or worse for the conference? Let's say Oregon started at 7 and won out and got right to 5. And then you're the topic of this conversation. What did they do enough to get in to the top 4, but were snubbed? Or better or worse, start at 4, win out, and somehow get leapfrogged and you still end up at 5. What do you see as being maybe a better scenario for the conference in terms of being in the conversation as a snub as opposed to falling out?
I mean, I can't imagine why anybody would think that the doomsday scenario would potentially apply to the Pac-12. Well, I mean, and actually the Pac-12, has kind of put itself in this position, right? I mean, the lack of having an elite team since 2016, the eat your own nature and mediocrity that has kind of dominated the conference. I think that certainly is going to play into what happens in the next 5 weeks and what the media narrative is and potentially what the narrative is in the committee room, because you can't completely forget about the last 4 years, and you certainly can't forget about September. And I just think that that is going to potentially undermine Oregon's case, is all the 0-4 and counting against BYU, 0-2 against San Diego State, right? 2 losses to FCS teams. But I think what would be worse for the Pac-12 is if Oregon was 4 and then they ended up getting leaped, even though they're winning out, because that would basically be saying the conference is dragging you down and dragging you out, rather than them starting a little lower and being unable to catch teams that are also winning. If they're there and they get basically pulled into the number 5 or 6, even though they are winning, that's more of a shot to me at the collective and at the perception that the league is mediocre.
That's a very fair point. What do you think is holding this conference back right now? And you've touched upon it, is it as simple as USC not being USC anymore?
I think that's certainly a big part of it, right? And Larry Scott got hit for a lot of things, and a lot of them were deserved, but he certainly was not directly responsible for what's happened to USC for the last 12 years, and if you just view what the Big Ten would look like, if Ohio State had been mediocre, it would, we'd have a lot different perception of that conference. So, what the Pac-12 needs to happen, there's so many, I don't know how long we're going to talk, but there's a lot of issues, right? And some of them are as grassroots as the talent pool in the West Coast. Yes, they're losing a lot of players, a lot of the five-star kids, but there's also a more basic problem of high school participation and parents pulling their kids out because they're worried about head trauma, and there not being as many 300-pound defensive linemen who can play Power 5 football, right? I mean, if you just look at the lines of scrimmage in the Pac-12 compared to the Alabamas and Clemsons and Ohio States, it just looks different physically, right? So I think that there's certainly a talent issue out here with the lines of scrimmage. The media company, Pac-12 Networks, has not helped because it's supposed to be a marketing arm. Nobody can see it. It's not generating revenue. The DirecTV issue, there's certainly a resource issue, right? We saw Mel Tucker just got, Michigan State could offer him more money, so he left, and look what he's doing at Michigan State, right? And then, just basically hiring better coaches, recruiting better. There's a lot of things that are involved, some of which the conference office scheduling is an issue.
Sure.
Or has been an issue. I think it's getting better. I think they finally understand that scheduling matters. So the conference office has been responsible for some of the stuff. The schools are responsible for some of the stuff. And then there's a little bit that's beyond their control, right? I mean, they can't stop parents for pulling their kids out of football and having them play soccer.
So I think a lot's been written across the country that the Pac-12 could certainly benefit from playoff expansion because you'd see more Pac-12 schools in this playoff, given whether it's 8 or 12, that's up for debate. George Kliavkoff has made many comments that this conference needs better representation and needs to do stuff on its end to earn better representation. Do you have any ideas for him? If he knocked on your door, do you have any creative kind of out of the box ideas that he's kind of hinted at that would help the Pac-12 in terms of football brand representation?
Well, certainly, and I've written about this repeatedly, those games where they're Washington is playing Auburn in Atlanta, or Oregon is playing Auburn in Arlington, the first Labor Day weekend, those games need to be in Vegas or LA, right? I mean, those are two recruiting hotbeds. You could get SEC or Big Ten teams to come out there, but they need to have more major intersectional games in their own footprint to just give them a little bit more of a competitive advantage. I think we're going to have that in, 2024? USC is playing LSU in Vegas. They got to do more of that, right? So that's one thing. Certainly scheduling a little bit smarter with the conference schedule, I think would help. Redoing the media rights deal, more money, more exposure is a big thing. They're trapped until 2024. There's nothing they can do about it. So, and playoff expansion is, it's not very creative, but they certainly need it because the whole thing is very, very circular, right? They're not getting into the playoff, and the five-star kids on the West Coast want to be in the playoff.
Yep.
So they're going somewhere else, which makes it harder for the Pac-12 to get in the playoff, and it just feeds on itself. So they need expansion more than any other conference. They should have been pushing for it, I think, harder for the last few years. The 8 versus 12 debate, they got to, whatever they can get. I don't think it'll be 8 because I think there's too much opposition at some conferences, right? I mean, that's like Greg Sankey against Mike Oresco in a steel cage match right there, right? The 8. Just the more access they can get, the better, and it will help everything. It will help recruiting. It will help generate enthusiasm among fans. So that's ticket sales. It's TV revenue. It's more money coming in, then they can hire better coaches, and it just feeds on itself, right? Football is like a living organism, and you got to have all the different pieces within functioning at maximum efficiency if you're going to get the most out of your product. And that's what the SEC does so well, right? They got everything focused on football. They are all about winning championships. And the Pac-12 has been all about winning championships in tennis. So that I think the new commissioner is going to change that. And the schools are on board with changing that mentality. But there's no question that the culture of Olympic sports success has kind of given the schools an excuse for not necessarily doing everything they can for football, because they see the commissioner used to be trumpeting all the championships won and not the football and men's basketball championships.
Yeah, you mentioned it being circular. I remember having a conversation with a coach once that says we need better players to win games, but in order to win games, we need better players.
Yep.
Chicken or the egg type conversation.
Absolutely. But the playoff right now, the playoff is what is driving recruiting.
Right.
The playoff in the first round of the NFL draft. That's why these kids, right? I mean, Alabama and Clemson and LSU, they're not coming out here for the 3-star kids. They're coming out here, they're selectively targeting the 5-star guys that are drawn to playing for the national championship and have their names called in the first round. And if the Pac-12 can start playing, get in the playoff, I think that'll help stem the exodus.
Which brings me to my final question: yes or no? And I feel like maybe the tone of this interview, you've already answered it. Is Oregon going to be in the Final Four when it matters?
No, I don't think so. But I think they're going to lose again. I haven't seen them be consistent enough, right? And their schedule is going to get way tougher. They're playing, to this point, they played the bad teams in the conference. The last month is against the better teams. And I just don't think they have been consistent enough to envision them winning out for 5 straight weeks. That's the biggest reason. I think if they do win out, they should make it, unless they're squeezed out by undefeated teams. But I think that they absolutely should make it over Ohio State if they win out. But it's going to be, right, we're going to get into that battle of strength of schedule and strength of record and all the analytics. And it'll be very interesting. I think that if it happens, it'll be a very interesting debate for the sport, because, there's something to be said for, if you don't win the head-to-head, if you win the head-to-head and you don't get in the playoff, then why are you playing the head-to-head, right? So I think there's going to be some repercussions if that's the debate, for scheduling in the future.
And then you've got the why call it a playoff if undefeated teams don't get a chance to play in it. And you've got, Cincinnati's got a case to be made as well. It's a bit of a mess right now.
Don't get me started on Cincinnati. I think that's, they were done wrong yesterday.
Like they've done everything that was asked of them, but I think you're right. Oregon's got to keep control of the conversation by winning. Should they drop another one? And it's kind of a moot point at that point.
Yes, it will. Oh, completely moot, because whenever this is the single guarantee in the history of the playoffs, is when a 2-loss team does get in, it's not going to be from the Pac-12.
Right.
That is not going to happen. So they got to win out. They got to look good. They need to play the best opponent they can in the conference championship game. But there again, there's a problem for them, because Utah's the front runner and they play Utah in a couple weeks. So either they're going to lose that game and get eliminated, or they're going to beat Utah, and Utah's going to be playing the conference championship game with 4 losses. So they got a tough road.
Jon, certainly appreciate you joining us, and thanks for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.